Hi, we are group 12 working on the grade tracker assignment for Computer Science 322, and this is our Sprint 2 review. So for Sprint 2, in Sprint 1, we created a base project in Django, and we created some basic functionality for a user to log in and view some very preliminary grades and comments added by an admin, which would be their teacher. And we wanted to expand upon this in Sprint 2 and add more functionality, so more of our interface and having students log in and getting to see a list of their assignments and comments and grades. And we want to add some functionality in calculating a total overall grade. And by doing this, we're going to collaborate with our database to pull some of that dynamically in their data to calculate things like overall grades and display them on the course. So for this assignment, in our sprint backlog, we did some like portioning out of like who's going to work on what. So Regine was assigned to work on doing some GitHub documentation. And so that was super helpful because we had one base Django file or project that was going to work on our project. And so we all needed to know how to effectively access that file and have it on our own devices to work collaboratively as a team. And so Regine was assigned to do some documentation on how step by step how to have everybody on the team work as a unit on that and have the correct files on their computer. And also, as we worked through Sprint 2, we discovered an error, or not an error, some core functionality where passwords were available to all admin. And so Regine also was assigned to work on encrypting those passwords. And that's still a work in progress, but those were the two main things. And so the time spent was like working on how to figure out an encryption like method and how to keep those passwords secure for that non-functional requirement. And also just creating some extensive documentation on how the group can all access those files for the Django project and keep everything on the same page and working correctly. So me, Rachel, I was assigned to work on user interface. And so for that, I decided to do some research into the user stories and figure out what pages in our project needed visual representation. And so for that, we decided it was the login page, home page, a course page, the add assignment form, and the calculate your final grade form. And so for that, I reviewed the methods for doing HTML, CSS coding, and created plans for doing user interfaces on Adobe Illustrator and created supplemental graphics on Adobe Illustrator to create some basic HTML user interface templates to give our application a more visual component to it. And we are working on creating the aspect of pulling from that dynamic database so that nothing is hard coded in and instead it's pulling things like courses and grades from that database. So Daria was assigned to work on the grade calculator. So we wanted that functionality of where students can log in and click on their course. And not only are their course grades displayed, but they are calculated. And they show an overall grade on that page. And so Daria worked accessing that database and using Python to create a functionality where it'll take a student's grades for a course and give them an overall score so they know how they're doing. And so for that, we needed to have some data in the database and the database set up. And then going off of that, Kyle was assigned to work with database processing and querying. And so with this database, we are going to have a lot of information in it, storing all of the students' profiles, and grade information. And so because of this like amount of information, we're going to be searching through this database a lot. And so it's important for us to develop very straightforward and efficient processes for accessing and like storing this data. And so Kyle was working with researching how to make the best functions for this and doing some coding, trial and error on how to find out how we can best access our data and pull that into the functions we're writing and make it the most efficient. And so now we're going to go on to the the Kanban board walkboard. So that's Cal.
All right, thank you. So I'll share my screen right now. All right, so here is our Kanban board, how it was before Sprint 2. And as you can see, we have the backlog, the things that are ready to be started, that are ready to be worked on, the in progress of things that have that are currently being under construction, and then like in review. And then we have the done column, which is things we did in the first sprint. And so during the sprint, you'll see that from here, the in progress board has grown to add more things. So as you can see, like we added the hypothetical grade tester from this first screenshot before sprint 2 to during it. And then after sprint 2, you'll notice that there have been a few things that have moved from the in progress to the done. Um, and so that is basically how the board looks. And then there's currently, it says that there's no ready things, but we'll definitely be adding more of those. And that's just a brief glimpse to how the Kanban board looked. And you think it's a good time to start showing the code. Um, so for this sprint, I was in charge of the database processing, and I had a couple issues doing that this time. Um, So when I first started, I wanted to have a way to get the courses just in like in code. And so what happened was that the first thing I did was that I created this function basically called student courses, and I was trying to just print them out onto the screen. And it took a little trial and error because at first I was doing it in views. Then I just was following some other code, and so I just did it in um, student grades. And you could see that I have I've commented out things that I've tried. Um, so I'm still working on this. This is something that's very much that's still being worked on by me. Um, but you could see another thing that I started doing was that for just debugging reasons, I wanted a way to just enroll in courses as the user. And so I created this enroll thing, this enroll page, which I'm also not done with. Um, I did a lot of work on, adjusting the URL patterns. Um, I looked through a lot of coding and stuff like that. And there was one issue that we had at some point during this sprint where the logout button wouldn't work. It kept taking us back to the it kept taking us back to just the home page or something. So I fixed that. The issue with that was the way that the path was configured. When we had it originally, uh, it had we had a separate log out HTML, and so I changed it to log in, and that fixed the issue where it wouldn't take us to the correct login page if you push that button. And yeah, that's trying to remember. Yeah, that's the extent of what I've done. I didn't get as much progress as I would have liked, but I'll continue working on it in the future.
Okay, yeah, and I can continue to a different section of our feature demonstration, like Cal started. And so I, Cal, do you wanna, yeah, okay, there you go. And then I can share my screen. And so um, this is going to be like an example of the user interface that we've developed. And so definitely we'll get to this later. A big part of Sprint 3 is going to be connecting all of the kind of floating pieces we have so far. But that should be something that we just will quickly work on in Sprint 3. And so this is HTML site. We used HTML and CSS to code this. Um, to do this, we wanted to make a really nice and professional looking user interface. And so this is the example for the login where people will put in their email address and ideally their university ID number. We're just going off of the way that maybe a WSU portal might look because students are not expected to make their profiles. They should already be logged in the WSU system. And so that was our template for the login page. Here we'd go to where a student would land once they've logged in. And currently these values are hard coded in, but that is just our next steps is to dynamically pull this data using like little placeholders, using like Django, like the way you'd write it for the Django program. And we'll pull that data in from depending on what user logged in, and they can click on their courses. And so once they clicked on a course, they'd go to a page that would look similar to this, where obviously all of these things would be pulled from our database. And it would display the course name, and it would show up with assignments. And so we're going to have the assignment name, a grade out of 100, and then if a teacher decides to add comments, they will show up here. If there's no comments, it'll stay like this little placeholder. And this is the feature that Daria was working on. Obviously, we haven't connected that functionality yet, but once we do, a dynamically generated grade from the assignments will show up down here. And then we did some pages for some basic forms for when a teacher is adding an assignment for a student. Those three things I talked about earlier, title, grade, and comments. And then they'd be able to submit the assignment. And then a very similar page would be when a student wants to know what grade they have to score on their final exam to keep their desired grade in the class. And so this should just be pretty basic arithmetic of just doing math on figuring out what the score should be. And it's just for like ease of the students to figure out what score they need to score in their final. And again, we need to add the functionality for this. But when they would fill out these boxes and they would click on this button, their grade they knew on the final would show up down here. And so that is the demonstration for the user interface we did. And then over here is the code that Daria wants to talk about for how that grade calculator will work.
Yeah, so I worked on just the basic grade calculator, which was a pretty elementary function as far as the actual math there, because we just decided to just go with all equal weights for the teachers and just calculate the different assignments and how much the total grade would be if we just average out that data. But in my code, as you can see, I had to import from the database the assignments that each student had completed, and then I populate a list with different assignments for that specific student, and then that then those are the courses obviously that are then averaged. I go through that courses variable once again, and that's pretty much it for that feature. It was pretty straightforward.
There we go. Okay, let me share my screen. So everyone can see my screen? Okay. So in Sprint 2, I created a README file, a detailed README file, so everyone can set up the database easily, as the database plays a huge role in our design. As you can see, I put all the comments, I'll put everything that everyone needs to set it up, the program. I also worked on encrypting the password before the admin was able to see a user password. So I changed that, and now the encryption used this algorithm to encrypt the password. I also put the reset password if the user head to the forget password on their login page, so admin can reset the password for them. Yes.
All right, so that concludes our feature demonstration. So just in summary, we've made a lot of progress on our application so far. We completed all the assigned issues for this sprint, as well as made progress on some unassigned issues that we just continued with. One thing that went really well this sprint that did not go as well for sprint 1 was our improved understanding of GitHub and being able to create a branch and then all participate in the code without accidentally overwriting anybody else's code, and all pushing to a main branch and then reviewing that before making it a part of the main code. We also did a better job of planning out our sprint ahead of time and spreading out the work so that we were able to accomplish everything without having to do a lot at the end. So for this next sprint, what we'd like to improve on is learning how to really connect the HTML and CSS files to our Python code, since that's something we didn't quite get to. And then we also have to put just finishing touches on the application, as you've heard throughout the meeting, and as well as do some testing to make sure that everything is working as it should, and make sure that there's no edge cases that would mess up how it's supposed to be running. And then finally, we just need to continue to populate the database so that we have plenty of ways to test the code with many different students and teachers with different scenarios. So in conclusion, we had a good sprint. It was very productive, and we finished everything we needed. And we have a plan for what we will be doing in sprint 3. And especially we will focus on testing and just making sure that our project is complete. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you.